Tonight, the crisis in NT Corrections continues, with tensions rising over severe overcrowding and imminent prisoner relocations. Good evening, I'm Isabella Tolhurst. This is ABC News Northern Territory. Also tonight, the corruption watchdog reconsiders its decision not to investigate robo-debt referrals. Kamala Harris delivers her closing argument just 1 week before Election Day, pledging to put country above party and self. And a relatively new religion making inroads in the ancient lands of the Northern Territory. Just days before the opening of Darwin's new youth prison, 2 teenagers have escaped from custody in Alice Springs. Meanwhile, the fallout from corrections emergency measures to relieve watchhouse overcrowding is spilling over into the courts.
Fresh from a multi-million-dollar facelift, the Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre now the site of a breakout. Police believe the teens climbed onto the roof and fled in a car, last seen on Il Papa Road, prompting an extensive search.
The Labor government promised Territorians that a new youth justice facility in Alice Springs would cost in the order of $13 million. That blew out to somewhere closer to $40 million, and just a few months into that facility being opened, can't even keep prisoners in it.
Some believe the escape is a foreseeable reaction to a plan to move all Central Australian teens in custody to Darwin.
Those kids would be so worried. They have no idea what's going to happen. Like, can you imagine being like 12, 13, 14, 15 and, thinking, oh, I'm going to be sent away from my family?
The plan, part of a crisis response to overcrowding in the adult detention system. Record numbers of adult prisoners are being sent to the Darwin Police Watchhouse and the Darwin and Alice Springs jails to free up space in watchhouses elsewhere. Darwin youth will be transferred from the former adult jail in Berrima to a new youth facility next week, making space for adult prisoners. And from early December, they'll be joined by Alice Springs youth detainees, so Alice Springs Youth Detention Centre can be repurposed for adult female inmates. In the meantime, inside Darwin Correctional Centre, prisoners are sleeping on mattresses on the floor.
It's like a pressure cooker situation in there. And, it's hot. At this time of year, it's really hot.
Today, prison conditions formed the basis for a number of bail applications heard in the Darwin local court. Lawyers for one man with serious medical issues telling the court he held concerns for his life, with the prisons in a state of what they described as absolute chaos. In a separate application, lawyers said a woman had been set upon, with rising tensions between existing Darwin prisoners and new women brought up from Alice Springs. The government promising to address the drivers of crime by kicking off consultation on a mandatory alcohol rehabilitation plan next year. Lillian Rangia, ABC News.
A woman was allegedly assaulted by her partner in broad daylight outside a popular pub on the main street of Katherine around 10:30 a.m. this morning. A crime scene was set up outside Kirby's, also known as the Katherine Hotel. NT police say they were able to use CCTV footage to identify the alleged offender and arrested a man a short time later. Police say he's expected to be charged with aggravated assault and a breach of a domestic violence order. The woman was taken to Katherine Hospital for emergency medical treatment. The NT government has announced $1 million in emergency funding for the Territory's Legal Aid Commission as a critical funding shortfall begins to impact the justice system. Earlier this month, the ABC revealed Legal Aid NT was cutting back services due to insufficient funding, leaving some defendants charged with criminal offences with no choice but to represent themselves in court. Already, the service cuts have started impacting Territory courts, with judges left in limbo when deciding whether criminal trials can proceed. In a statement, the NT government blamed the crisis on the previous Labor government and said it was continuing to negotiate more funding from the Commonwealth. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau says a light plane likely broke up in mid-air after flying too close to a thunderstorm, leading to a fatal crash in the Northern Territory 2 years ago. The pilot and passenger were killed when the Cessna 210 crashed on Christmas Eve in 2022, around 240 kilometres east of Katherine. In its report, the ATSB said the weather satellite information showed a rapidly developing thunderstorm in the region around the time the plane would have been flying through. It found the plane's right wing broke off mid-flight, likely due to a combination of turbulence, increased airspeed and control inputs. It says the crash highlights the importance of pilots maintaining a safe distance from dangerous weather. Devastated community members are rallying around the family of an 11-year-old boy who was killed yesterday when a car crashed into students at a school in Melbourne's east. Jack Davey is being remembered as a sweet boy and a gifted athlete who had a bright future. 4 other children were injured in the horrific crash.
Surrounded by a rising tide of tributes, a grieving family is overcome, struggling to grasp the loss of their son and brother, Jack Davey. This is how they want him remembered, full of joy, ready for another day of school with his mates. But yesterday, that was all cut short.
Our thoughts and heartfelt sympathy are with Jack's family and friends, and our thoughts are also with the 4 students who remain in hospital.
Such a sweet boy, really kind, never heard a bad thing about him.
Just an hour before the bell was to ring, a car performing a U-turn outside Auburn South Primary in Melbourne's eastern suburbs ploughed through the school's fence, fatally striking Jack and seriously injuring 4 of his classmates. This morning, family members, friends and the school community gathered at the scene, leaving tributes and holding their loved ones closer, all trying to make sense of the tragedy.
It's the worst nightmare for parents and families and siblings in a school community that you could possibly imagine.
Jack Davey is being remembered as a natural athlete whose talent shone brightly. In July, he was a member of the Australian Under-12s futsal team, which clinched victory in Fiji. The sport's peak body today paid tribute to a sweet boy, always in their hearts. The 11-year-old was also a gifted Aussie rules footballer, known for being calm under pressure and a tough all-rounder with a bright future. His local club, the Glen Iris Gladiators, devastated by his loss. But for Jack Davey's schoolmates, there are some questions their parents just can't answer.
They're asking me where is boy gone, when he will be back, where is that 4 kids, when they will be back. What I can say,
The driver, a 40-year-old woman from Hawthorn East, was arrested and interviewed, but has since been released. The surviving children remain in hospital in a stable condition as the local community rallies around.
This school community is so wonderful and strong, and together we will get through this.
I've got little kids. I can only imagine what it was like to drop Jack off to school and not pick him up.
A thought that many will struggle with. Danny Tran, ABC News, Melbourne.
The nation's Anti-Corruption Commission is under scrutiny tonight, with a new report finding the Commissioner didn't properly deal with a declared conflict of interest. It follows a decision by the NAC not to investigate individuals referred by the Robodebt Royal Commission, a move that now has to be reconsidered.
He's at the helm of the nation's corruption watchdog, but now the questions have turned on him.
I think Paul Brereton's position as Commissioner is in question, as the finding is that he committed officer misconduct as the Commissioner.
At issue, a perceived conflict of interest. Commissioner Paul Brereton was a close associate of one of the people referred to him by the Robodebt Royal Commission, and he didn't fully remove himself from the decision not to initiate an investigation, according to the inspector charged with keeping the NAC in check.
Commissioner Brereton should ask himself whether him remaining in that position is good for the National Anti-Corruption Commission.
The decision drew more than 1,200 complaints, with some considering the NAC had breached the public trust. While the Commissioner had declared his relationship and delegated the decision, the inspector still found his involvement in the decision-making was comprehensive. At the meeting where the decision was made, the inspector said the NAC Commissioner contributed to the discussion, settled the minutes and was involved in formulating the reasons for the decision.
The National Anti-Corruption Commission really has to heed the lessons of this episode.
The NAC has labelled this a mistake, a misapprehension by the Commissioner, and for this much anticipated body established to clean up politics, it's a bumpy start in its first high-profile case. Still, there's confidence from the major parties.
I think the public has total trust in the Commissioner and in the Commission.
The system has actually worked in that the Inspector General has said, hey, you need to go back and redo this decision.
A decision many will be waiting on. Evelyn Manfield, ABC News, Canberra.
Inflation has fallen to a 3.5-year low, but economists say it's still not coming down fast enough for the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates before Christmas. They now expect the first cut to come early next year.
Inflation rocketed after the first year of COVID and has been smashing the economy since.
It's just a balancing act. Honestly, it's really, really a hard balancing act.
Costs have been increasing, but businesses, in many cases, can't pass them on.
If you add up the margins, it's what you're going to do. You need to charge $35 for a Palmer, but we don't, because no one's going to pay that.
In the 3 months to September, annual inflation fell to 2.8% and was 0.2% for the quarter, driven by price rises in food and overseas travel, particularly to Europe, and breaks at home during school holidays. Other price rises were largely offset by falls in electricity as households received energy rebates and fuel from lower oil prices. The Reserve Bank's preferred measure of inflation, which excludes volatile items, fell to 3.5% annually, down from 4% the previous quarter.
These new numbers show that inflation is at its lowest in almost 4 years. Our energy rebates are helping, and we're pleased with that, but underlying inflation's come off substantially as well.
Temporary subsidies will not hoodwink the Reserve Bank of Australia, and they certainly won't hoodwink the Australian public.
People are struggling to pay more and deal with interest rates that have been lifted to try to tame inflation.
Past 18 months, interest rates on my mortgage have gone up. I've had to refinance my house. Cost of everyday items has gone through the roof.
Inflation is falling, but not fast enough to convince the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates.
We think that the RBA will need to see that underlying inflation measure come down a bit lower before they'll be convinced that inflation will not only return to their 2 to 3% target band, but actually stay there as well.
Of the big four banks, only the Commonwealth Bank thought that there was a chance that interest rates would be cut this year. After today's data, it's moved that tip back to at least February. Daniel Ziffer, ABC News.
In Central Australia, where ancient Indigenous songlines traverse the lands, a relatively new religious movement is gaining traction. The Mormon Church is on a mission to recruit members, and no community is considered too remote.
There is joy in every sound.
In this outback community, there's only one church. 250 clicks northeast of Alice Springs is Mulgabor, population 70. Residents say everyone is Mormon.
This church is like true church on earth today, the Mormon Church, Jesus Christ Church. And that's why they make me feel happy and keep me strong.
Missionaries have been travelling to remote Central Australia on and off for the past 4 decades, sharing teachings from the Book of Mormon. Elder and Sister Jackson came all the way from Arizona on their own dime for this bush assignment.
We are simply here to support the church's vision of bringing everybody to Christ.
Every day they drive for hours to remote communities dotted across the central desert to get their message out, relying on special pictorialised teachings from the scripture painted by local artists like Marie Ryder, who joined the church almost 30 years ago. Today, she paints stories from the Book of Mormon using ancient symbols and techniques passed down by her mother.
I've been doing it traditionally, putting like the U shapes representing people, And yeah, traditional and Bible stories combined. That's how I do it.
Since arriving in Australia in 1840, the church today has more than 150,000 members.
It feels like we've landed on some fertile soil with people that are wanting to hear more about Jesus Christ, and the missionaries have soaked that up and have been out there assisting and teaching where they can.
Christian missionaries have a long history of entering Aboriginal communities, but over the years they brought mixed blessings.
Yeah, there were missionaries and there were missionaries, and there were some missionaries that came in with terrible attitudes towards Aboriginal people and Aboriginal cultures, and other missionaries who came in more open-minded, or perhaps were forced to be more open-minded as they lived day in, day out with First Nations people who caused them to see things a bit differently.
Residents in Mulgabor say those teachings, like avoiding alcohol, tea and coffee and donating a tithe to the church, have changed things for the better.
My dad used to say to me, like, if we keep your culture strong, you will keep your community strong.
We feel right at home here. We love these people and they have been so amazing to us.
Going the extra mile for their labour of love. Lee Robinson, ABC News, Mulgabor.
Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, the community left without reliable power for almost 2 weeks.
If we had a pretty emotive picture of a flood or a fire, people would care more. Meanwhile, we're hemorrhaging internally.
That's put our livelihoods at risk.
Maintenance was not neglected at a cost-cutting measure.
There are many questions that we want to get to the bottom of to understand more clearly the facts that led to the power outage.
At least 90 people are dead or missing, including many children, after an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza. The US has called the attack in the town of Beit Lahia horrifying. It's also expressed deep concern at Israel's move to ban the UN aid agency, saying there's no alternative to UNRWA when it comes to delivering life-saving aid to Gaza. And a warning, this story contains distressing images.
Bodies line the streets of Beit Lahia as desperate Gazans dig through the rubble with their bare hands, searching for survivors. An Israeli airstrike on a residential building, killing and wounding dozens, including children.
This was a horrifying incident with a horrifying result.
The ongoing strikes underpinning grave concerns about Israel's move to ban the UN relief agency UNRWA in the occupied Palestinian territories.
This will cause great starvation for people. In this way, they're sentencing people to death.
With the backbone of the aid operation there, if you take the backbone out of a body, the body falls apart.
UNRWA's compound in East Jerusalem is already half empty. And Israel's been claiming for months Hamas has infiltrated the agency's staff inside Gaza, after it was found 9 workers out of 30,000 across the region may have been involved in Hamas's October 7 attacks.
In no one's wildest fantasies can that be characterised as the entire organisation being infected, infiltrated.
Come to the Knesset, and I'm going to personally show the evidence.
One of the sponsors of the proposal claiming a replacement aid agency will be found.
I think it's going to get even better of everything that UNRWA did.
Nearly 2 million people are displaced within Gaza, and most rely on UNRWA for their survival. It's feared its removal in 3 months' time will have dire consequences for those who remain. There are growing calls for Israel to reconsider, but little willingness from the government, it seems, to listen.
Right now, there's no alternative to UNRWA when it comes to delivering food and other life-saving aid in Gaza.
In southern Lebanon, more than 60 people have been killed in the latest strikes across the Bekaa Valley. While in Sidon, at least 3 apartment buildings have been struck as Israel ramps up its attacks on claimed Hezbollah targets.
This area doesn't have officials or people belonging to different political parties or anything.
Civilians once again bearing the brunt of Israel's relentless campaign. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Jerusalem.
The teenager accused of murdering 3 young girls at a dance class in the British seaside town of Southport is now facing an additional unrelated terrorism offence. The 18-year-old was charged with murder and attempted murder after the attack in July, which shocked Britain and sparked days of rioting. Police say the incident is still not being treated as terrorist-related, but after searches of the teenager's home, he's now being charged with possession of an Al-Qaeda training manual, in addition to producing the poison ricin. Russia has launched a massive test of its nuclear forces to simulate a retaliatory strike. The drills involved launches of nuclear-capable ballistic and cruise missiles and came amid soaring tensions with the West over Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin says Moscow will continue to modernise its nuclear forces, but that they remain an extreme measure of ensuring Russia's security. The drills come as both NATO and South Korea express alarm that North Korean troops could soon be joining the war on Moscow's side. President Joe Biden has appeared to call Donald Trump supporters garbage after a weekend rally that was overshadowed by crude comments. It came as Donald Trump courted the Hispanic vote in Pennsylvania, trying to brush off the controversy sparked by a comedian's racist joke. And in Washington, Kamala Harris has urged her supporters to reject the former president's efforts to sow division and fear.
In the heart of the Capitol, a speech heavy with symbolism.
We know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election.
Vice President Kamala Harris told the crowd her Republican opponent, Donald Trump, should not be given a second chance.
This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power.
What's your assessment of the race?
She's going to kick his butt. Yeah. There's a chance at history to be made, and to be able to be at this speech seems pretty special.
Donald Trump was in the Latino majority city of Allentown in battleground state Pennsylvania, still dealing with the fallout from derogatory comments made at his New York rally.
A floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Joe Biden has now weighed in.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
The president later claimed it was the hateful rhetoric that was garbage. But the Trump campaign has seized on the comments.
And I hope their campaign is about to apologize for what Joe Biden just said. We are not garbage. We are patriots who love America.
Up with the people, down with them.
In Allentown, opinions were divided.
Even my family that lives on the island right now, they all support Trump.
These recent comments is just a long history of hate. This rally is a rally of hate. That's how we see it.
Urged by some allies to apologise, Donald Trump instead leaned in.
There's never been an event so beautiful. It was like a love fest, an absolute love fest, and it was my honor to be involved.
In its early days, the Harris-Walz campaign was running on a message of joy and the other side being weird. In its final days, it's increasingly adopting the central message that Joe Biden was campaigning on, that Donald Trump represents a threat to the very fabric of this nation. In a week's time, the country will deliver its verdict. Barbara Miller, ABC News, Washington.
To finance now, when the Aussie dollar fell today after the September quarter inflation data came out. The local share market also fell, wiping out 3 days of gains. Here's Alan Kohler.
It took a while for currency traders to figure out what the inflation figures meant. At first, the Aussie went up because the newsflash said hopes of an early rate cut were dashed. But then it tipped over as everyone thought, oh, hang on, maybe it's better than we thought. And is now trading at 65.4 US cents, down from last night's 65.7. But I think the truth is today's figures change nothing. Sure, headline inflation is 2.8%, well within the target band of 2 to 3%. But we should ignore that because the Reserve Bank does. It looks at the trimmed mean, which cuts off the biggest 15% of price rises and the smallest 15%, and only includes the middle 70%. And that's even more relevant this quarter because of electricity rebates, which have temporarily cut the power prices to 30% below what they would have been. But core inflation is doing better than the Reserve Bank wants it to, which is to come down to 2.6% by the end of 2026. If it keeps doing better, then rate cuts are on. And if you've got young kids and you're thinking that inflation hasn't come down at all, actually, that might have something to do with this. Childcare inflation has soared to well above 10%. The main event on the share market today was also about the cost of living. Woolworths put out a trading update that said customers are under pressure and the earnings outlook is challenged. The share price dropped 6% and other retailers and banks also had a bad day. Globally, it was the US and Japan up, Hong Kong and Shanghai down, and not much happened on commodity markets apart from silver going up more than 2%. And that's finance.
Queenslander Nathan McSweeney says he's ready to open the batting for Australia should he be called upon for this summer's Test series against India. Selectors will have a close eye on the Australia A match in Mackay starting tomorrow, as several contenders audition to be David Warner's replacement. McSweeney, who will captain the team, is in excellent Shield and one-day form, but wants to cement his claim for a Test debut. The 25-year-old's been batting down the order for South Australia and says a move to the top doesn't faze him. And staying with cricket, after 8 years in the red centre, the Northern Territory has lost the hosting rights to the 2025 National Indigenous Cricket Championships. Organisers announced the tournament would go ahead in the Queensland city of Mackay next year in a move aimed at strengthening opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander players across the country. The Northern Territory failed to field a team in both the men's and women's divisions at this year's event. Cricket Australia has left the door open for the tournament to return to Alice Springs in the near future. Cam Smith will return to his junior roots this week in a bid to start his summer of golf on home soil in good form. The former world number 2 will be the star draw card at the Queensland PGA, an event he hasn't played in since 2015. The live golfer is home in Brisbane enjoying a 6-week break before he headlines the Oz PGA next month. It's an event he's won 3 times after missing the cut last year, shooting 9 over. New South Wales Police have made a major breakthrough in the case of the stolen Bluey coins. Strikeforce Bandit sniffed out more than 40,000 of the limited edition coins at a storage facility in Western Sydney yesterday. 63,000 of the unreleased dollar bucks were first reported stolen from a warehouse in July. So far, 3 people have been arrested over the alleged theft. Detectives are still on the hunt for the remaining 20,000 coins. Time for a look at the weather now, starting with this photo from Penny Dmitriev. Early morning showers and storms in the northwest, spreading across the rest of the top end this afternoon. Another hot and humid day in the north, but heatwave conditions are expected to ease from tomorrow. It was 34 in Darwin today, 36 in Batchelor and 38 degrees in Jabiru. Zooming out, Katherine reached a high of 39, Nhulunbuy was 33 and Borroloola 38. Tennant Creek reached a high of 39 and Alice Springs with 36. On the satellite, storm clouds developed across the north during the afternoon, particularly in the Gulf of Carpentaria and over the top end. There is scattered cloud across much of South Australia too. A large trough curves across the north of the country, bringing rain, while 2 smaller troughs are behind the wet weather in the southeast. A front crossing Tassie is bringing cooler winds to the southern states as well. Interstate tomorrow, possible showers in Brisbane, a top of 31 degrees. Sydney with rain, 25, partly cloudy in Canberra, 25 there as well. Showers in Melbourne, 19, Hobart a top of 15, Adelaide mostly sunny and 25, and sunny in Perth, 33 degrees the high. Around the Territory tomorrow, Alice Springs is heading for a top of 38 degrees, Tennant Creek 37. Further north, rain and storms across the board, Katherine 35 and Nhulunbuy 31. And in the west, the wet weather is set to continue, 33 degrees in Darwin, 34 in Jabiru and 35 degrees on the Tiwis. A low tide tomorrow will be at 11:50 tomorrow morning, and winds will reach up to 10 knots off Darwin. The sun will rise tomorrow at 6:13 and it'll set around 6:45. And taking a look ahead, a little cooler over the next few days in Darwin as the heat wave ends and showers continue. Overnight temperatures are staying warm and it is set to heat back up again over the weekend. While in Alice Springs, very hot days ahead into the 40s with some cloud coverage developing from next week. And that's all for ABC News this evening. Stay with us though. Sarah Ferguson is up next with 7:30. Have a lovely night.